I always believed in love, the kind that lasts a lifetime. For years, I thought I had it. My name is Lillian, and I'm 41 years old. I met Ethan when I was 27, and from the moment we connected, it felt like fate had brought us together. We built a life side by side, moving into a charming home in a quiet town. Ethan was everything I had ever wanted: steady, kind, a man who made me feel safe. We had 2 beautiful children, and together we created a world filled with laughter, trust, and late-night conversations about growing old together. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. We had our challenges, but nothing I ever doubted we could overcome. I thought I had a love that was unshakable. But then, little things began to change. At first, it was easy to brush off. Longer hours at work, distracted glances at his phone, moments of silence that hadn't existed before. I convinced myself it was stress, exhaustion, the demands of life pulling us in different directions. I reassured myself, just as any wife would. But deep inside, a quiet fear began to grow. Something was shifting, and I didn't know why. I tried to push the thoughts away, convincing myself they were just insecurities, whispers of doubt that had no real weight. But the way Ethan's laughter faded, the way his touch felt distant, the way our conversations became nothing more than routine exchanges, it was there, lurking beneath the surface. One night, I watched him across the dinner table, his eyes fixed on his phone, barely acknowledging my presence. I told myself it was nothing, just a phase, something temporary. But deep down, I knew. I believed we were unbreakable. But I was about to learn how easily love can shatter. The distance between us was no longer just a feeling. It had become something I could touch, something heavy pressing against my chest. Ethan had always been present, always near, always engaged, but lately, he felt like a ghost living in the same house. His body sat at the dinner table, but his mind was elsewhere. His voice answered my questions, but his heart wasn't in them. He took calls in the other room now, something he never used to do. When I entered, he would lower his voice, turning slightly away as if shielding something from me. His phone, which once lay carelessly on the kitchen counter, now rarely left his pocket, always face down. If it buzzed, he would silence it quickly, tucking it away like a secret he didn't want me to see. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself all marriages had moments like this: work stress, a busy schedule, distractions. But I was lying to myself. One evening, as I cleaned the kitchen, Ethan's phone sat unattended for the first time in months. It buzzed. I looked at it, telling myself I wouldn't touch it, that I wasn't that kind of wife. But then, another buzz, and another. The screen lit up, revealing a message from an unfamiliar number. "I can't wait to see you again, counting the days until I'm in your arms." The words didn't register at first. My mind tried to make sense of them, to find another explanation. But there was none. My fingers trembled as I picked up the phone. My heart pounded as I swiped open the conversation, and there it was, a trail of messages, sweet words, longing, affection, plans to meet, stolen moments, confessions of love. My stomach clenched, my hands went numb. I read each word, feeling them slice through me like 1,000 tiny blades. The man I trusted, the man I built my life with, had already given his heart to someone else. I tried to breathe, but it felt impossible. Images of our life together flashed in my mind. The nights we stayed up talking, the mornings we spent in quiet comfort, the laughter of our children in the home we built. All of it, suddenly tainted by a reality I never wanted to face. The sound of the front door opening jolted me back to the present. Ethan stepped inside, unaware of the storm waiting for him. He looked at me, and for the first time, I didn't see my husband. I saw a stranger. I held up his phone, my fingers wrapped tightly around the device that had shattered everything. His eyes locked onto it, and for a brief second, I saw it. Guilt. Not surprise, not confusion, just guilt. He already knew what I had found. He didn't need to explain, because in that moment I realized something far worse than betrayal itself. I had already lost him, and he had already left me long before I ever knew it. Ethan's face paled the moment his eyes landed on his phone in my hand. He didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't demand an explanation. He already knew. I expected anger, defensiveness, something, but instead he stammered. His mouth opened, then closed. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply before finally muttering, "It just happened. It just happened." The words echoed in my mind, hollow and meaningless. Affairs don't just happen. Months of lying, of sneaking around, of crafting excuses and leaving me in the dark, that wasn't a mistake. That was a choice. He rambled on, trying to explain. It wasn't serious. It didn't mean anything. It had been a weak moment, an escape, a lapse in judgment. But I wasn't listening anymore. The man in front of me, the one I had loved for so many years, was nothing but a stranger. Then, something shifted in his expression, as if relief had settled over him, as if confessing had lifted a weight off his shoulders. "I never wanted to hurt you," he added, voice softer. That was when I understood. This wasn't guilt. This was resignation. Ethan had already moved on. The realization was like ice crawling up my spine. My breath came in shallow gasps, my hands clenched at my sides, but I forced myself to stay composed. If he had already let me go, I wouldn't let him see me break. Not yet. The room felt suffocating, the walls pressing in, but I needed clarity. I needed to understand just how far his betrayal had gone. I turned away from him and walked toward his office, my steps slow and deliberate. He didn't stop me. He didn't ask what I was doing. Maybe he knew. Maybe he thought I wouldn't find it. But I did. Tucked between folders in his desk drawer, beneath old receipts and useless papers, was a signed lease agreement. An apartment. His name. The date, weeks ago. I sank into his chair, my hands trembling as I reread the document. While I was here, holding on to hope, he had already secured his escape. He wasn't just unfaithful. He had been planning a new life. Without me. Something inside me shattered in that moment, a final crack in the foundation of everything I had believed in. I placed the papers back carefully, almost too gently, as if the weight of them would crumble in my hands. I stood, walked past Ethan without a word, and grabbed my keys. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew I had to leave before I drowned in the wreckage he had left behind. The night air was cold against my skin as I drove aimlessly, my thoughts racing, my vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. How had I been so blind? How had I let myself believe in something that was never real? For years I had poured everything into him, into us, into a future that only I had been holding on to. I had given him all of me, but now I had to learn how to give everything to myself. The days that followed were filled with a numbness I had never known before. The pain wasn't sharp anymore. It had settled deep within me, like a wound that refused to heal, but I refused to let it consume me. I wasn't going to let Ethan take everything from me. He had already taken my trust, my security, my future as I had imagined it. But he wouldn't take my dignity. I found a lawyer the next morning. I gathered every piece of evidence, every lie, every betrayal. and made sure that when he walked away, he wouldn't do it without consequence. I wasn't going to be left with nothing while he built a new life so easily. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than heartbreak. I felt determination. Healing didn't come all at once, but it started in small ways. I began eating full meals again, forcing myself to taste the food instead of just going through the motions. I picked up an old book, something I had always meant to finish but never had time for. I stopped waiting for an apology that would never come. I stopped waiting for him. Instead, I focused on my children, on the life I was rebuilding, on the pieces of myself I had forgotten while loving him. Then, one afternoon, I saw him. It wasn't planned. I was walking through town when I turned a corner, and there he was. Alone. For the first time since it all fell apart, I felt nothing. No anger, no heartbreak, no longing. He looked smaller somehow, less powerful, like a shadow of the man I once knew. And I realized he was the one who had lost everything. He thought he could erase me, but I have never been more alive. The morning light poured through my window, warm and golden, yet it felt different, lighter, as if the weight I had carried for so long had finally lifted. For months, I had woken up with an ache so deep it felt permanent, but today was different. I no longer reached for the empty space beside me. I no longer replayed memories that no longer served me. The pain that once consumed me had settled into something quieter, something distant, like an old scar that no longer stung. I moved through my mornings slowly, deliberately. The smell of coffee filled the air as I wrapped my hands around the cup, letting the warmth seep into my skin. I sat by the window watching the world outside, realizing that for the first time in a long time, I wasn't longing for what was lost. I was looking forward to what was next. There was a time I believed my life would always be defined by my pain, by what he had done. But now, I knew better. I wasn't broken. I was becoming. I had survived the worst days of my life, and now, standing on the other side, I was no longer afraid. Not of the unknown, not of being alone, not of starting over. I had lost love, but in its place, I had found myself. And that was enough. Betrayal is a painful reality that many face, yet it is often the turning point for rediscovering strength and self-worth. Lillian's story is not just about heartbreak, it's about resilience, about choosing oneself after years of giving everything to someone who didn't value it. In today's world, relationships are tested by distractions, unspoken words, and sometimes dishonesty. While we can't control others' actions, we can control how we respond to them. If you ever find yourself in a situation like Lillian's, remember this: your worth is not defined by someone else's love or loyalty. Healing is a journey, and the first step is to stop searching for answers from the person who hurt you. Instead, redirect that energy into rebuilding yourself. Seek support, whether from friends, family, or professionals. Let go of what no longer serves you and create a future that is yours alone. Most importantly, never fear starting over. A new beginning isn't a failure, it's a second chance. Life doesn't end when a relationship does. Like Lillian, you will survive. And one day, you will wake up, take a deep breath, and realize you are truly living again. Life doesn't end with heartbreak. It begins anew. Subscribe for stories that heal, empower, and remind us of our strength. This is more than a channel. It's a community.